Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. I've been covering a lot of heavy material lately and I wanted to do something a lot lighter, and something a lot lighter just sort of fell into my lap when I listened to one of the panels from the C2E2 Con, which happened last weekend. And the panel itself was about the women community of creators over at Marvel, but they had a couple of cover artists on there talking about their covers for Marvel and for DC. And the thing is that some of the stuff that they talked about in creating these covers for Marvel and DC actually kind of shocked me. And I want to talk about covers specifically for both Marvel and DC, but we'll concentrate a little bit more on Marvel because it was a Marvel panel. And I'm going to use a lot more visuals than I usually do in my videos, so you might actually want to watch instead of just listening. So right off the bat, I'm showing you some covers from some of the artists that were actually speaking on this panel and some of the covers that they're referencing during this panel. Oh, by the way, I'll link in the description the podcast which actually lets you listen to this panel. So I'll start by saying this. Back in the time when I used to spend all of my money buying comics, because I only spend some of it now, back then I used to buy comics just for the covers. I mean, I would just look at the cover and grab it, not actually look on the inside. And I was at that point where I thought that if you saw a Barry Windsor Smith cover or a Art Adams cover, you actually would get that art on the inside. And I would get it home and I would look inside and I would be so disappointed that was not actually the case. But really, at that point, I didn't much care because you were spending 50 cents, 75 cents, 95 cents for a comic. So really, you weren't spending a whole lot of money, so it didn't matter that much. But today, comic covers are actually something that make me not want to buy specific comics. It really is, because if I'm spending $4 a comic, that's a lot of money. And when I look at these covers, especially Marvel covers, they are meant to trick you. They are meant to sell you something usually that has nothing to do with either the story or even the comic themselves. They had this round of covers going lately which had all scrolls on them across the entire line of Marvel, and there was nothing to do with the scrolls at all in any of the comics. They had a similar one a couple of months ago with Conan on all of these covers, and these covers were for all sorts of books, and they had the character of that book and Conan on the cover, but Conan was nowhere to be seen in any of those books. And recently they have those cat variant covers where you have these little cat stories on the cover of, let's say, Daredevil, and they actually have zero to do with anything in the comic itself. And I'm not joking about the cat covers. Go and listen to my other video about Marvel trying to draw in cat ladies as their new audience. Anyways, the thing is that with all of these kinds of gimmicks for covers, you can clearly see that they're trying to trick you into buying comics. And so a cover has become something for me that actually dissuades me from buying a comic. Because I'm standing there and if I'm looking at these covers for these comics, if one actually entices me to pick it up and look at it, that's fooling me once. Now I'm willing to put up with that because I would like to see what's on the inside, and I don't care if you fool me once. But if I was to pick it up and buy it on the cover alone and take it home and it be a crappy comic, which I would say you got a 75 to 80% chance it will be these days, that is fool me twice. And I'm not going to go down that road at all. So when I actually pick up a book, I go through it pretty thoroughly now before I actually decide to put $4 down for that book. And the thing is, again, that if the cover is something that obviously is there to trick me, I don't want to buy it. And this is what was going through my mind as I listened to these people talk about the covers that they make for Marvel. So I'll give you a little setup for this panel. You had two cover artists on this panel. One was Jenny Frison, the other was Ashley Witter. And they were talking to Judy Stevens, who has worked for Marvel for, I think, 13 years now. I really didn't know until this panel what Judy Stevens actually does for Marvel. She produces a lot of those small lifestyle brand videos that they put on the internet, the ones about cosplay and the ones where they take in people seemingly off the street and draw pictures of them as if they were superheroes. You know, ridiculous lifestyle brand videos that they've been putting up on the internet. But she's worked for Marvel for 13 years, so I think she probably has a bit of a handle on what's going on. Now, first off, I have to say that these two women, these two cover artists, they were specifically sought out by Marvel to do nothing but draw covers for Marvel. So this is their job. All right, they were specifically chosen by Marvel to do this specific job and no other job. I can't remember which one it is. I think it's Jenny Frison, who actually doesn't like sequential art. She said she went to the Kubert school and she didn't like it. She never finished. She only went there for 2 years because in the Kubert school, they do a lot of sequential art to teach you how to draw comic books. But she didn't like sequential art. She just wanted to do covers. That's all that she wanted to do. And that's all that she does do for Marvel. So you have to keep in mind that when these two women talk, this is quite specifically their job that they want to be good at, and that Marvel has chosen to specifically fill out these jobs for their company. And quite quickly, I want to say that these kinds of cover artists, they're not actually bad artists, but their job that they want to do is specifically to draw comic book cover art. And instead of actually looking at the rules of what works for comic book cover art, they're trying to make up new rules for themselves. So you have Jenny Frison. And she says this as being the central theme of what she wants to do when she is actually drawing a cover. She says, "What I want to draw is women feeling their feelings." And then she adds, and that does sort of apply to men too. So this is what the woman actually wants to do on her covers. She wants to draw women feeling their feelings. Now, can you look at some of those covers in the background that I've been showing you and see the women feeling their feelings? Now, I have to say, and again, I'm biased here because I'm a guy, but as a guy, I don't care about women feeling their feelings on the cover. If you want to put that in as an afterthought, sure, I guess that would be something, but you actually have to have a lot more than that first, and then put that other layer on top of it. That can't be the central theme of what you actually want to do with your cover. As a guy, I would say that what you need is one of three things. You either have to have, number one, action, or number two, your hero looking really cool, or number three, your hero looking iconic. Now, you can have all three of those things. And I would say a good cover actually does have at least 2 to 3 of those things. And then you can put your feelings on top of that if you want to, but you gotta start with a base of those 3 things. And besides all of that, I don't know a whole lot about art, I really don't, but I do know enough about art to know that you need to have a focal point for your actual piece of art, because that's what they're creating, just a separate piece of art, a portrait. One of these women in this podcast states that Marvel wanted portraits for some of these comics. That's what they wanted. But in that kind of art, you need to have a central focal point, and that should be the focal point of action. Really, that is what modern illustration is supposed to have as its focal point. You're not supposed to have the focal point of the person's face feeling feelings. So let's look at a couple of older covers and see what I'm talking about. Take a look at this Hulk cover. You can see a central point to this cover and how the sun is oppressing all of the characters on the cover. Let's take a look at this Captain America cover, which is Mike Zeck. Now, you know what the focal point is there. You know action is going to be there. You have your hero looking cool. Let's look at this Daredevil cover. You know what the focal point is on this cover the moment you see it. It is a cover that has action. It is a cover that has your hero looking cool. And the same with this Mike Zeck cover from Captain America. You have action. You have a focal point. And on these Mike Zeck covers, by the way, you also see the feelings on the faces of these characters. You know, that is superimposed upon the fact that you have a focal point, you have action, you have your heroes looking cool, and, by the way, a lot of these covers have become iconic because of all of these things. But that's the whole point, you see. I'm a guy. And guys want action, guys want the cover to look cool, guys want it to look iconic. But it seems like what women want is to see women feeling their feelings on the cover. Because there are two other people on this panel, two other women, who praise this woman, Jenny Frison, for actually doing this on her covers, saying that, oh yes, I saw Honey Badger's face, and you could see her feeling her feelings on her face, and that was such a great cover. And this is what they're being praised for by the people around them. This is what they want to see. This is part of what I was talking about in a couple of my older videos about comics being feminized. Because there's plenty of studies to show that you have females, and from the time that they are little infants, when they can first see, they started showing them pictures, and they did these studies to show that yes, girls are actually attracted to human faces more than boys are. Boys are attracted to shapes and mechanical things more than human faces. And girls are, since they are attracted to human faces more, they're attracted to the feelings on the human faces. And guys are attracted to other things besides feelings on faces. And they are selling these covers to women, but the point is that the majority of comic buyers are not women. And yes, you may be selling some covers with this, but are you maximizing your sales with these covers? Not a chance. But they don't care. So to move on to a couple of other quotes from this podcast. You have Judy Stevens, and I'm going to read a quote from her, and she trails off all the time. She says, "The use of colors is so... The cover is the thing that makes you pick up the piece, and having these bright colors and interesting shapes, or the use of negative space, is so important to get people to, it's dynamic." Now, like I said, she trails off a lot, and so that is actually one full statement from her. But she talks about these things. She talks about negative spaces, interesting shapes, bright colors, being dynamic. Now, you could say being dynamic is having action. I don't think they're actually the same thing, not in these women's minds. But let's look at this whole idea of negative space, all right? They actually mean what isn't there. They don't actually mean what's in the background or how you use your background. No, they mean what isn't there. And they're specifically praising this cover from Ironheart. And they're talking about the negative space in the background. Now, you see the negative space where there is nothing in the background? It has no correlation to anything that's going on in the picture at all. I mean, at least if it was blue, you could see that maybe she's fallen down out of the sky. But no, this is a negative space. And you can see it also in this X-23 cover. There is negative space. And for an older comic fan like me, that's wasted space. That's what that is. I mean, you have older covers that have a version of this, but none of the space is wasted. Again, let's look at some older covers. Let's look at this Wolverine cover. All right, this is an iconic cover. And there is black in the background, but that blackness is not a negative space. Why? Because the whole point is him being dejected in the dark. So the dark is actually something that impacts the cover itself. It's not a negative space. Let's look at these Barry Windsor Smith covers, all right? You have Wolverine again, and you have him surrounded by water. You have bubbles around him. And again, this is not negative space. This is the fact that that green, that you can't see anything, that's water. Or you have this cover from the X-Men. Now, in the background, you don't have anything significant, but you have a cloud motif in the background behind Storm. You see, this is not negative space. This is use of space to its maximum potential. Let's look at this Iron Man Barry Windsor Smith cover. Now, this would be negative space in the background. And this would be the closest one that I would say that would come to that Ironheart cover. And here's the thing. Yes, you have Barry Windsor Smith using negative space in this cover. Really, in the background, there's nothing that you can see that connects to anything. But this is a fail on behalf of Barry Windsor Smith. And I would say rarely can you say that about Barry Windsor Smith covers, but this is a fail because of that negative space. All right? You can't put in things like negative space and expect it to be a pass. But this is what is being praised in these new covers, this idea of negative space. Now, why is this being praised? Well, let's go to another quote, one from Ashley Witter. She talks about this idea of negative space, this idea of lighting and color. She says, "And I usually plan out the lighting beforehand because that's what makes the cover striking, is that you have your figures and then you want to light them so it draws people in." And here's what Judy Stevens says in reply to that a couple of minutes later. She says, talking again about lighting and color and dynamics, like these are things that you would walk by on a store and you'd be like, Oh, cool. I want to pick that up. So here's the thing with those kinds of quotes. You have these women who are drawing the covers. They're actually thinking about these things. Quite specifically, these ideas of lighting and negative spaces, these are what they're thinking about when they draw these covers. And you have Judy Stevens, and she's talking about it being a storefront. Now, I'm really not sure if she's talking about it being a comic storefront. I really don't think so, because if she is, she doesn't know what a comic storefront looks like. Because I've been to a lot of comic stores, and you don't take your new comics and stick them in the window of your comic store. I have never seen that. Really though, I think what she's talking about is actual storefronts. And here's the thing. When I hear her talk about this, what I think she actually means is a storefront like a woman's clothing storefront, where you have lighting and negative spaces. Because think about, you're going by, I don't know, let's say Tiffany's in New York. You have mannequins in the storefront, and you have all of this display. It is bright colors, and it is interesting shapes, and it is very specifically placed lighting, and you have your use of negative space, because you have your mannequins and then you have negative space. This is what it all sounds like to me. This is what it seems like they're talking about and what they're actually trying to do. They're trying to take a storefront of something like a women's clothing store and put it onto the cover of your comic book. And of course, because they're not actually using mannequins but making these into characters, then you put the feelings on the faces of these mannequins. Because for me, you have a lot of people criticizing these comics and these covers. Just go listen to Richard over at Comics Matter. He knows a lot more about art than I do, and he's criticizing these covers and the art within these comics, saying they look like a bunch of 3D models. They have to stop doing that. They have to learn how to draw. But I would say, after listening to this, no, that's actually what they want to do. It's not that they don't have any experience in drawing and need to learn how to draw. No, this is actually what they want to do. This is actually the direction that Marvel is giving them. That these covers should look like mannequins, and you just have a face on the mannequin, and then you put the feelings on that face. And it looks like a storefront of a women's clothing store. As far as I can tell from this, that is what they are describing here. This is what they want to have for their covers and for their comics. And that's the thing. When you look at other quotes from this podcast, they're talking about specifically doing these things because they want to sell comics. One of the other quotes from Ashley Witter after Judy Stevens says that is, "That's my job in doing covers, is that you want people to stop and look at something and get curious and then look inside the book." She also talks about the fact that she talks to the editorial staff. She talks to the writers. They plan out some of these covers. They give her loose directions on some. Some of them, they specifically plan these things out. The other artists that they're talking about, she specifically gets directions from Marvel to do portraits of single characters that are just standing there. This is what they want over at Marvel. These covers are what they're actually going for. And again, that just shows me that yes, there is this feminization of comics. They believe this is what will draw women in because as women and the women that work for Marvel now, they praise these things and want these things. So they think that the rest of the women out there will buy comics when they put this stuff on the cover, ignoring the fact that the majority of comic book buyers are not women. It doesn't matter to them. They want to make the majority of comic buyers women, and they will do whatever they need to do to ensure that that actually happens. Right down to the fact that they will make these covers that look sad and pathetic next to any good cover from the past. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. Alright, I'll see you later. Bye.